right, now I want to just do a little bit of review. It's good to get the review, and I'm trying to get it nice and concise as we go along. In review of the church ages, we want to remember what we're looking for, remember, is the evolution of church history, how things came about to be the way they are. And there's advancements and there's regressions and just all over the place. And it's always a question of what does the Bible say, and getting back to the Bible, and how they went astray over time also. Okay, so in reviewing the church ages, we remember, let me get my pointer out here. We remember the Ephesus age. These ages, and we're going to go all the way up to Thyatira when we look at this little bit of a review. We want to remember that these ages are consistent with what is said about them in the book of the Revelation, hence these names: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And so that again helps me to think of how inspired the Word of God is, that God would put those clues in there for us. So Ephesus, it was from 30 to 100 AD, we want to remember. And this time, as I go to review it, I want to point out how long these time spans are. 70 years this church age was. 70 years out of 1900 and no, well, actually almost 2,000 years now. Almost 2,000 years, because we're up in 2025. So that's a very short time span. This is also identified as the apostolic age. Now, when I say apostolic age, and I refer to some of these different designations, this is from church history studies, when people usually study church history, if they're not looking at the Revelation. And so they will talk about this as the apostolic age. And this is when the apostles were still alive and ministering. Even though it had the apostles' influence, it was still fraught with, at best, imaginative teachers, and at worst, false teachers. Okay, because of this, because of those false teachers coming in, it was considered, as it says here, the church that lost its first love. And I always remark about how that even though you have these apostles fresh out of seminary, they are with the Lord Jesus Christ, still you could have this thing take place. Brother Joe.
Yeah, I guess it's important to remember that in Acts chapter 20, when Paul was addressing the people as he's getting ready to leave, he had tears in his eyes as he was saying, ravening wolves are going to come into the church, and
Yeah.
Satan's not going to let anything of God lay uncorrupted. Satan knows he can't get rid of things, so he'll corrupt it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This brings us up to the Smyrna church, and the thing that marks the division here is the death of the last apostle, John, and of course his book of the Revelation. So this lasts from 100 to 300 AD. That's 200 years. Again, this is a kind of a short time span for history, just 200 years. And it was the designated here the suffering church. And that's the way it's designated over in the book of the Revelation also. It was the age that went through 10 persecutions. Because of the suffering, it had the highest commendation by Christ. Now, the Church of Philadelphia is going to also have high commendation, but for a different reason. I guess it's because Christ is going to just give an outpouring of his spirit to be able to break the doors wide open for evangelism. But this church had to go through suffering to achieve that. The relentless persecution forced believers to deeply reflect on and strengthen their faith to ensure its preservation. They contended with the synagogue of Satan. Now that's interesting because the next age is going to have the seat of Satan that's going to be lodged in the church. So now they're just dealing with on the periphery, the synagogue of Satan. Satan's going to enter the church in the next two ages. The next age would have to deal with the union of the church and state. And as I just said, the seat of Satan moved into the church. It's also known as, in seminary courses, the beginning of the patristic age. Now, seminaries would teach in church history that the patristic age extends up further. So I just refer to it as the beginning of the patristic age, the ante-Nicene Council, the before the Nicene Council fathers. So it's the age of the church fathers. So the suffering is what's noted for there. In Pergamus, okay, the the um, the mark between these two ages is when Constantine establishes the state church, the state church union. So this would be called the compromised church. It's in this, he doesn't actually um, name Christianity as the state religion. This is going to come a little bit later. And let me see. In 380, it's about 50 years later, it's going to become the state church. Christianity will be the state religion, but he gets the ball rolling by ending the persecution. This is 150 years. So again, you've got 70 years for Ephesus, 200 years for Smyrna, but only 150 years for the next age. And this is sometimes known as the Constantinian era because of his reforms. Okay. No, that's it's within this church age that it's called the state church, and that is at around 380 A.D. gets done. The official religion of the empire. But with Constantine's endorsement of Christianity, with the passing on down the Pontifex, the title of Pontifex Maximus, that Pontifex Maximus is the seat of Satan. The seat of Satan is where the Pontifex Maximus would serve in the pagan mystery religions, and so that's when you get this seat introduced. So before you had the synagogue of Satan, no, now you've got the seat of Satan inside the church, and then the end of the period is about 451 AD or 450. I'm using round numbers there to say 450. That's when the primacy of the Pope is declared, not over the Eastern churches, but the primacy of the Pope in the churches. That was when it was recognized, but it really ends. The dividing line is with 476, when the Western Roman Empire uh, was broken up. The Eastern Roman Empire stayed intact for a while, but the Western half is governed by different tribes and kings and things like that. Now, what's also notable at this dividing line of 476 is with the emperor gone, the Pope is the central authority figure. So you can see the political power struggle that's going on, and you're going to start to see the Pope to become like the Pope of today. Okay, so then we come up to Thyatira. With the fall of the Roman Empire being the dividing line, now you go into the time period of 450 to 1500. So you're talking 1,050. I'm sorry, yeah, 1,050 years, 1,000 years about for this church. This is considered the tolerant church. It's also, by seminarians, it's going to be the medieval church age. So from their reckoning, apostolic to patristic to Constantinian, and now medieval church, and that's the way they describe the ages there. Um, and it's at this point where you have had, again, remember, in Smyrna you had the synagogue of Satan to deal with. The seed of Satan is introduced into the church, and now it runs rampant because the mystery religions are accommodated, and you're going to get a lot of pagan ideas that are going to crop up. The pagan ideas that are created, they are not misinterpretations of the Bible. They are wholesale doctrines that are brought over from paganism and put alongside. Keep in mind that Satan, as the counterfeiter, had been up to this not just during the church age, he'd been setting his counterfeits up from the time of the Tower of Babel. Okay, so this age, the Thyatira age, is going to be noted for the rise of the power of the Pope, the power of the Catholic Church, and as we say often, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the very thing that they thought that they were getting is what's going to do them in. Its dogmatic, political, and moral abuses then influenced the advent of scripture study uh, that is brought on by the Renaissance. The age is marked by the fall of, well, it's marked by the rise of the Protestant Revolution, but towards the end, you have the Renaissance age, and preceded by the fall of the Eastern Empire. The Eastern Empire, Constantinople, falls to the Muslims, and you get this influx of scholars bringing with them Greek scriptures and a lot of other ancient writings. This sparks a lot of humanism, not as we think of humanism today, where man is a god, but humanism as in man is able to understand things, and we should be studying more instead of appealing to a clergyman to interpret everything for us, tell us things just by whatever pronouncements were made abusively in the Catholic Church. So that's where we're at. So as you think about history, if you want to be a good student, you want to think in terms of this, what is taught in church history for the ages: apostolic, patristic, Constantinian, medieval. Okay, you want to think of that, or you want to think in aspects of the Revelation and what's said in there. Suffering. I'm sorry. Church lost its first love, the suffering church, the compromised church, and then the tolerant church. And then the third thing you want to do is track the power. Or, as they might say, follow the money, right? Okay. And that's probably a thing that probably really well applies in this time, well, in any time period, because power is going to deal with money and people surviving. Okay, so we're going to go over to the last slide that we looked at. Let me find it here. Okay. We looked at the dissenters the last time. The difference between the dissenters, the early reformers, and the pre-Reformation, talking about a different kind of influence, a different kind of godly influence to different people. Dissenters we looked at already. That was on page 161. The dissenters, it starts there, paragraph 439. The dissenters were those who were separate from the Catholic Church. They were not trying to fix the Catholic Church. They were just flat out saying, no, thank you, we're on our own. And that included the Paulicians, the Petrobrusians, the Cathari, the Henricians, and then the Waldensians. And these are just several groups. There would be other groups. Some of them were meeting in secrecy, but those are some prominent dissenters of that time period. The early reformers are what we're going to look at today. Now, these are people that stayed in the Catholic Church. They were trying to reform it. They were not like the Reformation reformers, who, by virtue of their work, had their churches split off of the Catholic Church by one means or another. So these are people that are in the Catholic Church, but they're trying to fix things. And then we're going to get to the pre-Reformation, and why they're called the pre-Reformation would be people like John Huss, John Wycliffe. I can't think about any others. We'll get to those in a little while. Why we think of those as pre-reformers is because of the time period that they were in, and they set this. They in their work did the kind of work that enabled the reformers to take action. John Wycliffe is going to be known for his Bible translation. His works are going to be spread out. John Huss is going to be influenced by them. Others will be influenced by them. So essentially, Wycliffe's Bible translation, and Tyndale also would be one of these. He was another Bible translator. Their translation work is what is during this time period is going to precede the actual Reformation itself. Their work will ignite the Reformation. So we want to remember that during the Thyatira age, that there were still independent churches in spite of the political powers of the state church, and that's these guys here. Revelation 2:24-26 says, "But unto you I say, and unto the rest in Thyatira, as many have not this doctrine, and which have not known the depths of Satan," Satan being accommodated during this time, "as they speak, I will put upon you none other burden, but that which you have already hold fast till I come. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations." And so in other words, there were good works that were going on at this time, but they were vastly outnumbered by the state church and coming into conflict with them. So we looked at some of the dissenters who were independent of the state church, and today we're going to look at the early reform attempts within the state church. It was within the state church. They were not part of the widespread Reformation that would break from the Catholic Church later on in 1500. And so their leadership fanned the flames of the later reformers. So the big idea is that while some churches operated apart from the state church, there were efforts underway within the state church to change. So that's the big idea during this time period. Paragraph 458 there on the top of page 165. Reading from there says, while some churches, I did that. Okay, across the medieval period, men who addressed abuses within the state church were plentiful. There were even popes who sought reform. Some of the popes actually sought some reform. There's no definite starting point that determines who should be included in this category. It's sort of, the early reformers, they're sort of all over the place. And we're going to look at just a few of them. So one of the early guys there from 810 to 827 operating was Claudius of Turin. Okay, this is paragraphs 459. I'm going to summarize. You can read that later on. Claudius of Turin, he was bold and a reform-minded bishop. He was sent by the emperor to northern Italy to combat heathenism and the influence of Mohammedanism. Say that 10 times real fast. Okay, and one of the things that gets me is and I'm not going to be referring to Savonarola, who was also an early reformer, but you have these guys that are in Italy itself, and you would think that that here's the heart of Catholicism, and certainly it's going to be strong there. But no, not necessarily. He was a strong opponent of image worship, and he removed religious images from churches and teaching that departed saints should not be worshipped. So So you can see the reforming efforts right there. He was combating, and this is what I'm going to say for all three of these people that are in here. They were combating within the church the false doctrines that had been planted alongside of them. He argued that prayers for the dead were ineffective. He rejected the worship of the cross, crucifixes, and pilgrimages for merit. He called them futile for earning God's favor. And Claudius emphasized faith and internal devotion over external rituals and denied that apostolic authority came simply from sitting in an apostle's seat. So if that's not an early reformer, then I don't know what is. His strong evangelical stance and his willingness to challenge prevailing practices made him very much a notable figure of reform. Remarkably, despite his controversial views, he remained in his episcopal position until his death. Okay, so these guys were part of the Catholic Church. This is highlighting the relative freedom of the time. Claudius's influence endured in northern Italy and southern France, and then it would inspire others to think critically about traditional religious practices. So you can see why the scholastics who would come after him, where they might have gotten some of their influence from. Okay, they were starting to look at things philosophically. Next batter up, Arnold of Brescia. He was also a bold reformer from northern Italy. He studied theology and canon law in France before he returned back to Italy. He passionately called for a separation between the church and secular authority. Remember, you had those political goings back and forth. The Pope would eventually claim authority over the temporal powers also. That would be the latest development that they ever had, the height of their political power grab. He argued that the church should renounce temporal power and focus solely on spiritual matters. But that's difficult to do if the church and state are mixed with each other. He went so far as to reject the authority of one of the popes. He advocated instead for a republican government in Rome, free from papal influence. So he had a message of civic autonomy and a more spiritually focused church. And a lot of Italians who were frustrated by secular rulers under the heavy church influence. However, his defiance of church authority led to his excommunication, expelled in 1145. He was captured and executed. But he was a churchman. Okay, so he again was working within the church trying to reform it. Okay, next batter up, Henry of Lausanne. He was an ascetic preacher. In other words, he was denying a lot of physical comforts in life and wanted to be, living very in poverty, looking for benefit of others. He began in France in an interim role. His powerful preaching greatly influenced many churches, but his teachings were controversial and they were deeply critical of the established church. He rejected the authority of the church in both doctrine and discipline, advocating instead for the gospel, freely interpreted as the sole rule of faith. And now, the Catholic Church is not going to sit still for that. They're wanting to put everything in the power of the clergy and their power. He condemned key practices such as infant baptism. He also condemned the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Mass, the communion of saints, and prayers for the dead. He also refused to accept any form of formal worship or liturgy. Those who followed his teachings became known as Henricians. So his challenges to church authority eventually led to his imprisonment, and he died around 1148. But he did leave behind a movement that continued to question the traditions of the church. So you can see these are all reforming efforts. They're early reformers. Their work is going to help build up the environment where the Reformation leaders, because they had the political power behind them, they're going to really be able to take off. They're going to have the Bible and printing of the Bible. The reformers will. They're going to have the political power to protect them and sustain them. They're going to have the frustration of the years in the Catholic Church to fuel them. So it's like that's going to be a real powder keg ready to explode when the Reformation gets done. But there were also, interestingly, papal efforts for reform. um, Dissenters and pre-reformers were catalysts for change, but their work leveraged principles to trigger the large-scale transformation of the next church age in the Reformation. But in the larger context of the church system, the consolidation and strengthening of papal power was not the only factor that was at play in the explosive nature. There were also the pressures from within the Roman state church that some of the popes were trying to address. It was not just the pressure of the dissenters and pre-reformers. Various efforts by a number of popes contributed to the growing pressure for the Reformation. Any efforts of the popes to create reforms was a Sisyphean, Sisyphean futility, since the state system was attempted to deal with corruption by its nature, created corruption with its political administration. Think about that. How many people know of Sisyphus? What happened to Sisyphus? Okay, so Sisyphus, he angered the gods, and so he was condemned. His punishment he could get out of if he could just roll this rock up to the top of a hill. But he was predestined, if you will, that when he got the rock to the top, he would somehow manage to miss his footing and the rock would roll to the bottom. Oh, if he could only get it up. So he's always trying to get the rock up to the top of the hill, and the very thing that will elude him is that success, because it's just too much. This is what was happening in the Catholic Church. They might get their power, but they could never quite get it because their efforts would always lose. And so it's going to take somebody to explode the rock. That's what the Reformation is going to do. Okay, so let's look at page 166. Let's look at some of these efforts. I'm going to look largely at the bold print here. We'll look in the first bullet point. They opposed simony and convened synods. Pope Leo did. He opposed those things, and he was trying to get moral discipline among clergy members. So that was notable. That was good. Pope Gregory VII in 1073, he initiated the Gregorian reforms. One, in the bold print here, one of the central issues addressed by the Gregorian reforms was the practice of simony, which involved the buying and selling of ecclesiastical offices. Oh, you want an office? How much you got to give me? Okay. You want to be a Sunday school teacher? Sure. Slip me a 5 or 2 and we'll get you in place. But he was opposed to clerical marriage also, though. Next bold print there. He sought to enforce the practice of celibacy among the clergy and eliminate simony. He had a vision of a church with centralized authority that would be less susceptible to corruption. Except when you get centralized, it brings about more corruption. He believed that only the Pope should have the authority to appoint and invest bishops and other high-ranking church officials, thus reducing the risk of corruption that was resulting from the secular influence. No, the emperor, some king, a mayor, he can't have any power in that. And so he utilized the power of excommunication to discipline those who resisted his reforms or engage in corrupt practices. Miss Nancy.
Yeah, we were, as Catholics and even secular people, are familiar with Gregorian chants.
Yeah.
And there's just a certain droning quality that the Latin singing of I guess they were hymns to them. what is the connection with this Pope and Gregorian chants? Like, why did that happen under him?
Okay, I'm not. I do not know enough music history to go into it properly, but it's just the time period in the evolution of music is what that's largely related to, and the science behind the music. That would be. I'll tell you what. I'll try to look that up
So you
this
think it's just
afternoon.
coincidental it happened at that time period, so they called it that Pope's name?
Exactly, exactly. And there was certain spiritual qualities. I'll have to find that out. But a lot of it is due to just how music developed. You know, they're going to start using harmonies. The harmonies were not noticeable in the early music like that. That will come into play later on after that. So that would be maybe I can do something on that. Get a quick history. Okay. Okay, so Pope Urban, in the next bullet point, he tries to have enforcement of clerical celibacy, and a lot of that is due to the fact that they were sleeping around, and that's the problem. That's the problem. So he wanted to have more celibacy. Pope Alexander, in the bold point, he promoted reform, especially in terms of curbing simony and corruption within the clergy. And again, see, this is a big problem. It's dealt with by all of these guys. Pope Innocent, and the bold print there, he sought to establish standards for priestly conduct. He intervened in secular affairs to promote moral and ethical conduct. And by the way, this is what's going to really tick off Martin Luther. He's going to go to Rome thinking he's going to have all the answers, and he goes there and he realizes that it is more corrupt, more morally decadent than anything he'd ever seen. Not going to do an awful lot to keep him in the Catholic Church. Um, Pope Clement V, um, in the bold point print, he was reforming monastic orders and holding councils to address corruption. Pope Nicholas V, he supported the Renaissance movement and sought to strengthen the intellectual and spiritual foundation of the church. So you can see how all of these things that were going on, even within, I mean, not just the early reformers, not just the guys who really crystallize the Reformation and its separation, but there were those within the church who also were disturbed by what was going on. Not enough to keep them from going for the power grabs, though. Okay, let me ask for questions or comments for this. Anything from home? Yeah, yeah. So when I think of the uh, when I think of the Reformation efforts, I want to recognize that yeah, there was stuff. There was stuff always happening. It was not just some monolithic Catholic Church, and I think that's the idea that modern day Catholics would like to leave you with. That they're the ancient church and they've got all the tradition behind them. No, they got a real mess that goes throughout the Catholic Church. Yes, Miss Nancy.
I know that the Inquisition was particularly cruel, and that, I mean, they would think up ways to torture people and try to get them to agree or to recant their protests against the church. And yet we're seeing here that even some of the popes within the Catholic Church
Yeah.
were upset by corruption or bad doctrine. Um, what happened? I mean, did this? I guess the Inquisition.
The power of the Inquisition overpowered these popes' efforts. I mean, even as you look at some of these popes, they're like trying to enforce the liturgy and the sacraments and things like that. I mean, they were up to their own problems. But the point here is to say that it was not uniform. that they did recognize some of the problems. Some of the ways they dealt with it was to send crusaders out. There was one of the guys that's mixed in here that was sending out the first crusade, even though he wanted to have some Reformation efforts. Then they had the guys that were utilizing the Inquisition. So by and large, they were messed up with power. But, and here's the point, even they saw that there was something that had to be fixed.
But wasn't the Inquisition like around the 12th century, right around where we're studying?
Yes.
So I'm trying to reconcile people torturing believers.
Because
with-
they were the outsiders. So even if you had the popes, that some popes who were making certain negligible efforts, okay, they would do that on their authority for what they wanted. But that guy over there, no, we got to make
So
him. We got to torture him.
The popes didn't get in trouble when they saw problems, but
Well,
I guess because they were still within the church,
they had the normal problems that anybody would have politically, you know.
but they didn't get tortured.
Yeah.
They didn't get tortured.
No, those popes, they were in charge of the torturers.
I would think that the Catholic Church would find the popes that question things far more threatening than little pockets of outsiders that just seemed like renegades with a small following.
Well, okay, because the renegades were uncontrollable. They were not so small. They were gaining influence. And so they wanted to stop the ones who split off. They were called innovators, coming up with new doctrines. They weren't new doctrines, but they were calling, and you couldn't have that. As long as you stayed within the system, you were semi-safe. Anything that threatened the system got persecuted.
I think Martin Luther really tried to stay
Yeah.
within the Catholic Church for a long. I don't know that he ever actually left. I think they finally excommunicated him. I just don't know why they tolerated him for so long.
Because the German princes were backing him. These other groups didn't have princes or kings backing them. Luther did, and that was even hard. John Huss had the same problem. All of those the guys who were involved in the Reformation, they had their own political power by that time.
Well, wasn't Huss burned?
Yeah, he had power backing him, but no, they tricked him and he got killed anyhow. They offered him safe conduct, and when he got there, they wouldn't encourage his security. And I'm pretty sure that Huss is that one. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll handle our own disputes here, but the church across town will condemn them, kind of thing. But we ourselves, we're trying to figure it out. That's kind of mentality that the popes would have had. And again, they even though they saw some things, they were very mixed up in the system and looking for power also. The point is that that this was not something that could be totally ignored.
I think what amazes me, I mean, if you read Fox's Book of Martyrs or anything, the extent of the cruelty,
Yeah,
and the barbarism, the things that they thought to do
Yeah.
to people, how could they reconcile this with the Christianity that they claim to profess? How could you do that to a person?
Yeah.
And say, well, I'm doing a favor to God by doing this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't there be some way that they could say, all right, look, you guys, we warned you, you've got to believe such and such, and now that you refuse, you're not going to enjoy the benefits of thus and so, rather than killing them in these bizarre, cruel ways.
Well, and that should have happened, but because if you had normal church that was not mixed with the state, but because of the fact that the state and church were mixed together, the church's role is to extend grace to people to get them saved. If they're bad boys, then we let the government take it over and they can execute punishments. When you mix the church and state together, now you not only having the state trying to enforce religion, but now you have the religion trying to enforce the role of the state. So you take on the role of the state. First, you want to try to save people, but because you've got the power of the state inside the church, if they don't listen, you can kill them then.
But it's not even like they just killed them. They
Oh,
had
yeah.
to make sure there was long suffering,
I had to set an example for all
Yeah.
the rest.
torture. You know,
Yeah.
they have to make everybody else terrified by saying, well, see, look, this will happen to you
Yeah.
unless you cooperate.
I guess they were no different from Islam in that point. The sword, believe or accept Allah, or you get the sword. Allah or die.
Esther?
Tell you that then it wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, Mr. Stanley.
Yeah, it's funny you just said that with Islam. I was just thinking, isn't it that way? And has been for a while in Iran right now, where religion has power over the actual
Yes.
government.
Yes. In fact, long ago, I've said Islam is not a religion. It is a political power that uses the language of religion to disguise itself. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's the church and state joined together there. Only it's not a church. It's the, what do they call it? The mosque and state. Yeah.
Oh, I had one other question. I was trying to remember. I mean, I could probably look it up, but you're right here. I was trying to remember when, and it was the church that really had the power with the early astronomers that got like burned to the stake for their scientific discoveries that went against the church. Obviously the church at the time wielded a lot of power if these people, these astronomers, were allowed to get burned like that and killed.
Yeah. Copernicus was one who was who met that fate, and I can't remember.
Was that like in the 1500s or something?
Let me see if I can find that.
But that's what I thought of, how much power the church had if they said sacrilege and put them to death, and everybody's like, okay.
Okay, let me make an inquiry.
He was not burned at the stake of God.
Copernicus. He was excommunicated, I think. Okay, so
There was another guy who was down in Bruno was burned at the stake. So very authentic view of the-
One of the astronomers, I think, was definitely burned.
yeah, Bruno.
okay. Yeah, now regarding Copernicus, he also had the heliocentric model. The sun is at the center of the universe. Initially met with limited opposition. Church even supported astronomical research because the heliocentric model contradicted the geocentric view that people misinterpreted the scripture. He was viewed with skepticism. His work was placed on the index of prohibited books. Galileo initial support. Warned in 1616, not okay. Copernicus was 1564. Galileo around 1616. He was tried by the Roman Inquisition. He was forced to recant his views publicly. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. In 1822, the church finally figured it out that the sun is at the center. And in 1992, John Paul II expressed regret for how Galileo was treated. Okay, so yeah, there's probably other stuff there because I know there was persecution. Galileo, if he was put under house arrest, That was a shame. But all of it had to do with the heliocentric view of the universe. Miss Nancy.
It wasn't until 1758 that the Catholic Church dropped the prohibition of books advocating heliocentrism. 17 took
17.
all those years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Just about in time for the American Revolution.
It just shows you how dangerous the church was back then.
Oh, yeah. In fact, this has really come to a head in just this year alone, where you had government intervention trying to censor the internet, to censor Twitter, to censor all these people by a roundabout means. And the push has been for freeing up information. And I hate to say it, but the Democrats were very much into um, uh, trying to repress free speech. All the while they were saying they were for it. But no, they were trying to repress free speech, if anything, whether it was censorship, numerous lawsuits, um, false, all bunches of lawsuits, the whole mess. So we still have the same problem today of protecting free speech. Over in Britain, there are people that have been brought up on charges just because they were thinking things. I remember one report where there was this lady who was praying outside of maybe an abortion clinic or something. She was praying outside of whatever. The policeman came up and asked, she was praying silently. The policeman came up and asked what she's doing. She said she was praying. Oh, you're under arrest. She couldn't even think the prayers. So, yeah.
I read that. I couldn't believe it that she was just standing there and she answered the cop honestly when he said, "What are you doing? What are you doing just standing here?" And she said, "I'm praying. You're under arrest."
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I love Baptist churches. And you've got some upstarts that are non-denominational churches, but they're really not. I mean, they think they're doing good by not offending people, but they're also not establishing any sense of longevity beyond their mega church status. And so what's happening is I think the independent fundamental Baptist churches are still promoting their independence of thought, and that's one of the reasons why I like keeping the name Baptist on a church. Miss Nancy, yeah.
Something that never changes is the secular government feeling so threatened by anything that has to do with God. They'll arrest somebody for just what they're thinking. Yeah. And yet in our so-called enlightened age, with all the pictures we have of space, I mean, we've sent things out there to have these amazing images. And now we've got a group is growing that believe in a flat earth.
Yeah.
And people might laugh at them and roll their eyes, but you don't really see the government in a panic. I'm going to arrest you. Yeah. You're a threat to science. You're a threat to our children. You're teaching false things. Only when it has to do with the spiritual. They just simply cannot handle anything. You can't even think about God. You can't even pray silently. And you're not doing any harm to anybody around you. You're going to get arrested.
Yeah. And even though Jews are not exactly Christian, and it's like, against Christians you can have all this persecution and get away with it. You can't get away with it with Islam. You'd be shut down if you said anything about Islam. And then these other groups. So you say, well, but Jews are not exactly Christians, but Jews do represent a biblical, a real biblical people.
And that's because Satan hates the Jewish people and he hates Christians.
Yeah.
No other group gets persecuted the way Jews and Christians. Yet you can see it's satanically inspired.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind all the other groups.
Pastor?
Yeah.
I just had one more thought. All these years later, Britain still doesn't get it. I mean, that's why they ultimately lost control over us years ago, because of freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And here we are in the year 2024, and they still don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we wound up thriving and actually helping them in times of war, and they still, they still don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and God was so merciful to England. Look at
Yeah.
all of the preachers
Yeah.
with the great revivals, and England was spiritually awakened. And look at them now. What a
Yes.
short amount of time later, and they're dead
But
spiritually.
because America very powerfully recognized freedom of speech and had it put into the amendments there. This is something that Britain did not do by choice. So they sort of evolved into things because they didn't get that. They didn't see what freedom of speech really meant. And yet freedom of speech really comes from that heritage. They just never crystallized it or articulated it very well. But I've seen, I couldn't quote them now, but I've seen clips where you've had some American politicians reminding England, this is why you lost. The American Revolution, that is.
Oh, they did say that?
Yeah, I've heard it said. Yeah, I don't know if I could ever find things like that, but I've heard it said. Yeah, guys, this is why we won and you lost. Yeah, there is a if you ever want to do some very interesting reading, there's a work. Let me see if I can get it up here. It's how the British invented freedom. Okay, let me get the proper title of it. Okay, it's up for $10 on the internet. Inventing Freedom: How the English-Speaking Peoples Made the Modern World. It's by Daniel Hannan. He is a very interesting conservative British politician. Nice read. The first part of it is a little bit denser, but you get, I guess, by about halfway through it, you start seeing, oh wow, there's a case that's actually made out there that the American Revolution was the English Civil War Part Two, and it was a direct descendant of what had been fought in the English Civil War. And he does a good job of it. Really well worth reading if you want to do some extra reading. I think it's pretty clear too. That is in here. Let me. Okay. $10 Kindle, $12.79 paperback. This other book, The New Road to Serfdom, I didn't get to read that, but he quotes that from himself. Very interesting. And this was written back in, is there a date on this? Okay, I don't see a date for it. It's been a while since I've had it and read it. Okay, well, very good. We are, oh yeah, you can see I purchased the paperback back on in 2024. Sent that on up to Annie.